Well, Carice did address that earlier, but let's get deeper to it. Was the balloon the real reason or merely the excuse for the cancellation of Blinken's visit? Another quick fire round, and we pick it up from there. Jonathan, take the lead, please.
Yeah, look, I think this administration's default position is diplomacy. So I think it very much wanted to go, if they wanted Blinken to go to China, I think they wanted the engagement and to see if they could begin to establish a modus vivendi between the United States and China. It obviously is not working. At least up until now. I think the Chinese continue to find ways to provoke the United States. I think it left Blinken and President Biden with virtually no choice but to cancel in light of what just happened. Otherwise, it would have been an embarrassment for the White House.
Dan Perry.
The U.S. clearly wanted the visit, so the balloon is indeed the reason. The more interesting question is China. They had to have known that it would likely be discovered and it would scuttle the plan. So if they wanted to, fine. If not, it does raise concerns about decision-making in Beijing, and one might suspect that the various branches are even not coordinated, and the whole thing is a mess, which is, of course, something that would neutralize one of the main advantages of dealing with a dictatorship, that at least you know more or less what to expect.
And for you, Carice, it's not an excuse necessarily for Washington, but definitely an attempt to foil the visit on behalf of China, right?
I don't know if I'd use the word foil, but I do think that it was bad timing. I agree with Jonathan that the U.S. is interested in diplomacy, that they put a lot of effort, and climate change, for example, is a huge factor for the United States and wants to work together with China. But we also know that Xi Jinping is planning to come to the United States for APEC in later this year, which will take place in Florida. So I think this was an effort on China's part to slow things down.
And let's feel free to interact, of course. Is Washington's China policy working, Dan?
Look, the U.S. has a huge trade deficit with China. I don't think it's very happy about that. The U.S. feels vulnerable because China holds $1 trillion in U.S. debt, and they're not too happy about that. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to Taiwan. All this stuff, I think, is a little bit in the background, and issues that are strategic around the South China Sea, but in particular Taiwan, are probably the main thing. The only thing that truly can blow up this standoff between the U.S. and China is that, and that depends really on Xi. His past bellicosity, as Carice said, seems to have subsided somewhat, probably because they are experiencing economic difficulty.
Jonathan, is the White House taking the right approach? Is Biden too soft on the Chinese, as GOP leaders argue?
I'm not sure we have a China policy yet, if I'm going to be really honest. I think that, 20, 30 years ago, I think our approach was to go all in, buying cheap Chinese products and getting cheap Chinese labor, collaborating as much as possible, and offering the opportunity for the Chinese Communist Party to engage more with the West and to become responsible global stakeholders. That has clearly failed. Now we're in the process of wagging our finger at a whole bunch of other allies, telling them not to engage as we did for the last several decades, asking them to curb their engagement with the Chinese while we still have massive amounts of business. Just about every product you can buy on Amazon is made in China. As we just heard, they're holding massive amounts of American debt. We've got a lot of work to do ourselves if the goal is to decouple, as it's often said. I'm not seeing it happen. I see some moves in the right direction, but I don't see a full recalibration yet. And I think we may begin to see more of it now that we've just had this wake-up call in the shape of a balloon over the northern United States.
I have to say maybe another issue is the dashing of U.S. hopes that China can become a player that, although it has very much a different system that the U.S. does not agree with, can be an ally in geostrategic issues. And we see very clearly what I called before an informal alliance of despotisms as regards Russia today, as regards Iran for the past decade or more, really. There's almost no way to rope in China into anything resembling a global consensus that the U.S. will find reasonable, and that's a major problem.
At the same time, Xi Jinping has said he wants to reshape global governance to make the world more conducive to China's interests.
Well,
and I think it's definitely incumbent upon democracies and like-minded countries to work together, in spite of the fact that, yes, the United States holds different standards for itself as it does for others. Nonetheless, I think it's in everyone's interest to cooperate. And I do agree with Jonathan that the policy is in development. And it's very important to keep those allies and partners closely informed so we can work together.
The post-war order was really created by the West, led by the U.S. It cannot be denied that when the U.S. hoped to rope China into that world order, it was a world order of its own making and to a degree very convenient to the West. Indeed, China wants something completely different, and the implications societally, culturally, economically, geopolitically are enormous, and that's a challenge for the U.S. and the West.
But if we want to test this alluring ability of each side, Indonesia is a perfect battlefront to look at, and it seems that China got edged there. Jonathan.
Look, I think this is certainly let's call it a seesaw battle right now between the United States and China. You can see that the U.S. is able to edge the Chinese out in certain key jurisdictions. I think, by the way, Israel's a great example of this, that Israel made the mistake of engaging a bit too aggressively with the Chinese, got its wrist slapped, and now there appears to be really full-throated cooperation, or certainly more cooperation than we've seen in the past, and China's winning fewer tenders. And I think that's happening in a lot of places around the Middle East and beyond. And so there is a bit of a seesaw battle. The only question is, has China jumped out to a bit too much of a lead? I think that really is the concern. They've been playing this game for quite a long time before the United States woke up.
I think it would help to put things in.
Look at what happened in the Philippines, where Marcos was the first in Asia to go to visit Beijing. And then a month later, Lloyd Austin was in the Philippines securing bases as close on islands as close to Taiwan as possible and as close to the Spratly Islands as possible. So I don't think it's so clear how things are developing. There's movement by both the U.S. and China, and it's definitely an ongoing competition.
I would also note that we can do a disservice by pretending that we're talking about two equal players on the world stage. Nonetheless, China has shown spectacular economic growth. There's no discussion about that. But at the same time, where that growth brought it to is this: with about a sixth of the world's population, it accounts for about a sixth of the world's economy. The U.S., with less than 5% of the world's population, I think still accounts for a third of the world economy. So China's catching up, but in nominal terms, it has a very, very long way to go.
Okay, we're out of time. Definitely not out of passion, nor out of topics to discuss. So we are hoping to see you all back again on the show soon. Carice, with Jonathan Schanzer and Perry. Thank you very much for this. To be continued.